Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to Chatsworth as we continue on the journey of the stories of the house and the collection it contains.
In the last episode, we saw the major changes that the 6th Duke initiated in making the North Wing at Chatsworth. We're going to stay with him a bit longer, as he was a significant figure in the history of the building. He collaborated with figures such as the architect Sir Geoffrey Wyatville and the engineer, gardener and designer Sir Joseph Paxton. The 6th Duke was also a brilliant documenter of his work, and even now we refer to his records to understand the usage, design and some of the history of the house. He was active in the first half of the 1800s, so he is also closer to us in time, and therefore it is not surprising that we know more about him and the activity that he commissioned. So Alex, in this episode we're going to be looking at the 19th century at Chatsworth, and this is the period when the 6th Duke comes to the fore. In 1811, at the age of 21, he takes over the dukedom, and shortly after that he actually commissions a set of Royal Derby porcelain depicting the main seats that make up his inheritance, and that's what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so we've got Hardwick Hall, Chiswick House, Chatsworth in the middle. This is Lismore in County Waterford in Ireland, and Bolton Abbey in Yorkshire.
And done very much in the sort of Paul Sandby estate painter style. It really does show the immense sort of collections that were circulating around this inheritance at this time, and very much what would become during the 6th Duke's time a new way of displaying these and a new way of enjoying these properties and collections.
Yes, with the 6th Duke, he's someone that we refer to very often because it is in his lifetime that he creates major changes to many of these properties, but he records them really well and he creates great documents that we can look back to and really find out the detail of lots of the things that he was doing to these properties.
And also, excitingly, we're entering the period of photography. So some of the things that we're going to talk about during this episode, we actually have photographic evidence for. So Alex, we're looking here at a guide to Moscow, and this was a gift from the author to the 6th Duke when he went to Moscow to attend the coronation of Tsar Nicholas I. And he was there as the extraordinary ambassador of George IV, who he was a friend of, but actually in opposition in government. And it's great to look at this here because it's so nearby to these two incredible portraits by George Dore.
Yeah, and they hang here on the oak stairs where they have this amazing collection of portraits, and they really stand out because of their scale, but also because of the way these two figures are depicted. It was the first time they were shown in their ceremonial dress, so we're completely aware of their status. And I think what's important in this space also to acknowledge is the 6th Duke here is starting to make a Chatsworth that speaks to his international interests, but also the fact that he is, like his predecessors, becoming a major collector and transforming the house to adapt to those collections, but also to the ways in which he wants to entertain, the kind of people he invites here, and just his way of life, which actually transforms this house.
The 6th Duke of Devonshire was extremely well travelled, and he often took with him people who he was working with at Chatsworth to inspire them about the world, but also to be a travel companion. And they often brought back with them ideas for new developments in the house and garden, but they also brought back real objects which would become part of the accumulation of things at Chatsworth that the 6th Duke had to transform this house yet again to display.
And this is one of a series of albums that we have which record those travels. So here we have these very fine watercolours which are basically acting in the way that we might use photography today to record views, but also interiors, architecture, all sorts of details that the 6th Duke wanted to remember and bring back with him to Chatsworth.
And because he was the Duke of Devonshire, this is actually by Corelli, an artist that he actually had first met in Naples. But I think you're right, the power of these works is it is a world before photography, and these are basically just really good holiday snaps. So Alex, this beautiful watercolour of the southeast facade of Chatsworth was commissioned by the 6th Duke after he had completed the facade in 1827. And this is very much about him marking that moment. And here he is, almost depicted back in time, sort of making the plans with his architect. So we have this Duke here in this blue coat, and we have Wyatville showing the Duke a series of architectural drawings.
Yes, so Wyatville has this red portfolio on the ground in front of the 6th Duke. And then what we have around them and the setting for the house is this kind of very picturesque landscape. So there's no hint really of gardening going on here. We have this rolling lawn, and then we have trees almost engulfing the architecture in the garden here. And then beyond we've got the landscape of the Peak District. And in the sky, it's incredibly dramatic. There's all sorts of weather going on, so it's just completely framing this new building.
So, Alex, when the 6th Duke inherited his estates, we've already mentioned Chiswick, that was actually the place that he met another great figure, which was to have a huge impact on Chatsworth right up to this day.
Yes, and that figure was Joseph Paxton. So Paxton was working on land near to Chiswick. He was working for the Royal Horticultural Society, and I think the 6th Duke must have recognised his talent and got in there quickly, because Paxton was about to embark for America to kind of further himself and learn more. He was obviously quite an extraordinary person, but the 6th Duke brings him to Chatsworth and he becomes head gardener, and it's in his time as head gardener at Chatsworth that Paxton really begins what would be an amazing career in terms of garden design, building, plant collecting, engineering. We have evidence of the work that he did at Chatsworth that survives. So the Emperor Fountain, which is an enormous gravity-fed fountain, the Rock Garden, significantly, those are still major parts of seeing the garden at Chatsworth. And then there are things that don't survive anymore. So these photographs are of the Great Conservatory.
And Paxton would go on to actually create Crystal Palace for the Great Exhibition. And that's obviously how a lot of people still remember him. But at Chatsworth, he's really interwoven into so many parts of our story. So he would travel with the Duke, he helped the Duke on projects which maybe had nothing to do with gardening or engineering. But I think what's lovely is, although they died before these photos were taken, they give us a glimpse back into a world that they would have seen. Because obviously the Great Conservatory is no more.
Yeah, so here we've got an exterior shot of the Great Conservatory, an interior shot which is great because it shows us the extent of the plant collection within there, and then another photograph which is from much later in the 20th century, the early 20th century, when the greenhouse had fallen into disrepair. So in the First World War there wasn't the coal or the manpower to keep this building going, and so eventually it's demolished.
Yes, during the time of the 9th Duke. But I think what's so wonderful is this was magical. You know, Queen Victoria actually rode through this in a carriage when she visited Chatsworth. It was all illuminated. This cemented Chatsworth as the palace in the Peak.
So here we have a really fascinating volume from 1711. It's a history and practice of gardening, and it was a gift from the 6th Duke to Joseph Paxton in 1827. And for me, it's objects like this which encapsulate what must have been a fascinating relationship that those two men had, having conversations about how and what they were going to bring to Chatsworth, how they were going to develop the garden, what they were going to build, and how they were going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of the friendship side of a working relationship. These are two men who are deeply involved in the exploration and research around gardens, around landscape, around what they can do at Chatsworth. But I think the fact that this was a gift from one man to the other does speak to a friendship, and we know from the correspondence that they were continually inspired and inspiring each other. Much of what we know about the house of the 6th Duke comes through the 1844 publication by the 6th Duke of his own handbook to Chatsworth and Hardwick.
Yes, but let's not forget this publication wasn't really for wide distribution. It was intended for very close family, really, and the handbook really is addressed to his sister, Harriet. And I think it's better to see it really in the context of private letters and correspondence, which the 6th Duke was apparently really great at. His sisters praise him for his letter writing, and the tone in which the handbook is written is very much of that kind of quite intimate, personalised and personal way of writing.
The house that we see today is through that lens. You know, the Duke made such a lasting impact on what we now see as modern Chatsworth. And it really wasn't until the master plan that happens in the 2000s that we really get a new sense of rebirth for the house. So Alex, after the death of both the 6th Duke and Paxton, the process of moving Ensor over the hill out of sight of the house really moved into the realms of the 7th Duke, and the 7th Duke engaged Sir Gilbert Scott, the renowned architect, to work with him on the church here that we find ourselves.
Yes, so this building that we see dates from 1864 to 70, and it's absolutely typical of that period in terms of its style. And what it does is incorporate some earlier features of previous churches. There'd been a church here since Norman times. And then in the side chapel here, we have a monument to the sons of Bess of Hardwick. So we're circling right back to the earliest incarnation of the family.
And that's a lovely way to sort of tie our story together in one building. So we've got the story of Bess of Hardwick, the story of the 6th Duke and Paxton, and then moving on to other generations.